Welcome back to Inside City Hall. The New York City Housing Authority just unveiled a new 5-year strategic plan to confront a growing list of problems that are confronting the agency, including a shortage of available housing and a $13 billion capital shortfall through 2015. Here to discuss Plan NYCHA and the future of public housing in our city is the Housing Authority Chairman, John Rhea. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Good to be here, Errol.
Let's talk about this capital program. When we say capital, we're not talking about money. We're talking about the housing stock. And that number is so big, $13 billion shortfall over the next few years?
Correct. So the $13 billion reflects the needs of investing in all of public housing across New York City. As you know, Errol, we have 180,000 units. So the number seems large, and it is large, but it's in the context of the total infrastructure. Currently, to put it in perspective, today, we have about $7 billion of unmet needs, and between now and the end of 2015, that number will grow to roughly $13 billion. It's reflective of the fact that the housing stock is aging, right? Over 75% of our buildings are over 40 years old. Unfortunately, there wasn't a plan to have an ongoing state of good repair from the money that we received from the federal government. And here in New York and across the country, public housing is underinvested in, and that's the result of many, many years of underfunding.
Yeah, when I talk to you about it, because we've had this conversation a number of times, it almost seems like you're the guy trying to plan the invasion of Normandy with like 25 people, right? And they can be the most valiant, well-meaning, pretty well-armed guys, but it almost seems insurmountable when you're talking about multiple billions of dollars like that.
Right. Well, the number of families that we serve, and when you think about it, NYCHA serves 650,000 New Yorkers. So it's roughly the 20th largest city in the country. Sure. It's a city within the city of New York. And if you think about that being the second largest city in the state of New York, it's well worth the investment. We support families who are desperately seeking, safe, affordable housing. The $13 billion, again, is a large number. I don't want to underplay it in any way. And to address, a capital backlog of that nature and the associated quality of life issues that NYCHA residents face, we certainly need support from not just local elected officials, but at the state level and as well as at the federal level, as well as others in the private sector and in the philanthropic sector that believe that this is a critical asset that's worth preserving.
And just to be clear, when you say unmet need or a backlog of unmet needs, you're talking about the elevators, the locks,
the roofs.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the heating and cooling systems, all the building envelopes, the bricks. Again, if you think about the sheer number of housing units that we're referring to here, this is the largest stock of permanently affordable housing in New York City and in the country. And if you were to look at a replacement cost of that number would be multiples of $13 billion. It'd be, $60 billion or something along those lines. So it's a great investment if you think about, ensuring the stability of those families and the preservation for long term.
I tend to read things with a political eye, and so reading between the lines of this report, I see that the federal government has sort of put some limits on how much it will subsidize, and the state and the city haven't come through with certain key amounts of money on an ongoing basis, and that's what creates this backlog. Are people just giving lip service to public housing without really providing the dollars?
Well, I think public housing is challenged by many of the forces that confront, supporting families in this country. And public housing happens to be one that's very visible because it is a physical asset, and so you can see the lack of investment in the deterioration. Let's keep in mind that this was a commitment that our tax dollars that go to the federal government is intended to support. The federal government has underfunded public housing dramatically. The federal government admits that. The city and the state have stepped up over the years to try and support some of the areas that the federal government has not completely followed through on, but suffice it to say that has not been sufficient, and it's going to take a partnership on all three branches or levels of government, local, state, and federal, in order for NYCHA to really have a plan.
And government support, of course, is the largest source of revenue, but running, I guess, a close second or third, you've got lots of different ideas, and that's really kind of what the centerpiece of this is. Tell us about some of the ideas.
Right, so there are a couple things. One, NYCHA has to do the best job we can with what we receive in terms of our federal and state and local subsidies. But we also have to look at the asset base we have and how can we generate more revenues off of that asset base. And so some of the examples that we talk about in this plan deal with developing NYCHA's land. It looks at, we have facilities that we operate, community centers and other services within the community that we don't receive funding for today. And so we have to be more creative about not only leveraging our asset base, but ensuring that there are the kinds of supports for the services that families rely upon.
Mm-hmm. And so translate that into translate it into a practical plan that people can sort of put their hands around. You're talking about charging agencies or groups or even individuals for use of some of the recreation centers, for example?
So put it this way, nothing's off the table other than, not preserving the units of housing that families rely upon every day. We have to be honest, when we spend roughly $75 million a year on services to residents beyond housing. So whether that's educational programs for youth, whether that's job training and placement for young adults. And today we only receive about $12 million for that $75 million in cost and grants. And so the money that we're using to support those services really detract from the core of providing high, safe, secure, quality housing. And so we have to look at partnerships. And so we've launched some very innovative partnerships. For example, with the Robin Hood Foundation last year, we launched a job training program where Robin Hood provided the funding, third-party philanthropic organizations are providing the job training, and NYCHA is doing the coordination. We have to do a lot more of that in order for us to be able to ensure that the resources are making its way to the community, but not happening on the dollars that we don't receive to support those activities. And in looking at our asset base, we have air rights, we have land. We need to build more housing on that land. It's not without, some people who feel that that's putting more density into neighborhoods that are dense enough, or removing green space. But we recognize that the trade-offs are important in terms of getting more housing where it's needed, but also creating revenue for NYCHA that will support the broader footprint.
Yeah, one source of revenue, and this dovetails with a constitutional question that's been in the news lately, is the issue of houses of worship that maybe want to temporarily or on a week-by-week basis rent space in public housing. What's the policy, and is this money that the NYCHA is going to be turning away?
So this is one that I just kind of chuckle at, because NYCHA has not had any conversations about discontinuing our relationship with houses of worship. So we have had a number of churches, religious organizations that have been good partners and good tenants, and we look forward to continuing our relationship with them.
Okay, so the folks in the Bronx River houses and some of the other places there, are they just reading what's been done with some of the public schools that are now off limits?
I think that there's been a misplaced concern based upon other issues that are not related to NYCHA.
Okay, very interesting. Now, I don't know what's charged, but I've been to weddings in public housing. I've certainly been to church services, churches that are using the public housing facilities and renting them out for different purposes. Does that bring in any sizable amount of money to the agency?
It's small. It's small. But what we've tried to do, and many of the houses of worship and religious organizations have used this, is where we have temporary permits for use of our space, right? So if you're holding a wedding, as you suggested, or a reception, and you want to rent out a NYCHA community facility, then you can enter into a temporary arrangement with us for the use of that space. And it brings in, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars, and certainly not enough to address the size of the backlogs that we're describing here.
Okay, and one big area that you identify in the report as well is the cost of energy, and I was very surprised to see how much it costs to and this is what, just fuel costs that have shot your expenses out of control?
Yeah, it's principally heating oil cost. But there's electric cost as well, and what we spend roughly a little less than $600 million a year on energy expenses in public housing across the city, across the 5 boroughs. And so we are looking at massive ways that we can retrofit our buildings with higher efficiency boilers, instantaneous hot water heaters, ensuring that the building envelopes are secure and that energy isn't creeping out and being lost. That alone will take billions of dollars to make those investments, but those investments have a huge operating payback in terms of our ongoing annual operating expense and energy costs.
Do the energy costs get passed on to the tenants?
To a certain extent, yes, although not on a unit by unit basis. Within a public housing residence rent is some component of quote unquote their utility costs. The problem is individual apartments aren't metered, and so it's not as if if Errol Lewis uses less energy than John Rhea that there's a reflection in our rent payments.
Right, and of course one of the other areas, and it's always a sore point with people, but the question of parking.
Yeah.
Can you like park for like a year for like $35 or something?
The number's not that low, but it's also not consistent with the private cost of parking in the city.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, many residents, by definition, are low income and struggling with making ends meet. So we're not in the process of really trying to quote unquote turn a profit off of parking. At the same time, I think we have to ask two questions. First of all, is the parking lot the best use of that precious resource, land? In many cases, the answer is no. Whether it be the need for additional affordable housing, whether it be a need for schools and other community facilities that actually will have not only a higher utility but potentially can generate larger revenues for NYCHA than charging quote unquote market rates for parking, we need to look at those options. Secondly, where we do have parking and make sure that it's just enough to be sufficient for the needs of the community, I think we do have to take a look at ensuring that we're charging what residents can afford to pay, but that's in the best interest of the authority as well.
In our last minute, one of the innovations you brought right when you got there was public-private partnerships, so that private capital could come in instead of using tax credits, leverage some of the desperately needed repairs and upgrades and so forth. Is there going to be another round of that?
We will look at doing a lot more of that. So what this report talks about is leveraging the private market for public benefit. So yes, we expect and going to continue to push the government to do all they can to support NYCHA, and that's critical. We can't lose sight of that. At the same time, there are mechanisms in the marketplace through, as you said, low-income housing tax credits as an example. We also want to take a look at other mechanisms locally that we can use to incentivize developers to invest in NYCHA, both in rehabbing our existing buildings as well as developing new low-income units within our communities. So we will be doing a lot more as part of the mayor's housing marketplace plan. We have 2,000 units that we expect to begin either construction or planning in 2012 alone in terms of new affordable housing, and we expect that number to grow over the coming years.
Okay, very good. You're always very optimistic, like I said, as you prepare to storm Normandy with far too few resources and troops. But best of luck to you, and thanks for giving us a look at the state of the city within a city.
I appreciate it, and what we're really asking for is people to focus on NYCHA as a priority and working with us on storming the challenge.
Very good. We are going to take a break. I'll be back in a minute with the results of tonight's Snap poll and a preview of tomorrow night's program. Stay with us.